The check was for $5 million, and Paige Hollander held it against the counter with 2 fingers, like it might get away. "Sir, I'm going to be direct with you. Nothing about this adds up." Amos Kearney said, "Then call the number. It's right there. I'll wait." He'd been saying some version of that for 19 minutes. What he did not say, what he had decided at 7 that morning that he was not going to say to anybody in that building for the rest of his life, was that he had first walked into this exact room in August of 2007, when it belonged to a different bank, and sat in the second chair against that wall while a man in a short-sleeved dress shirt explained to his mother why refinancing was the smart move. Same room. Same wall. They'd moved the chairs. "Men like you," Paige Hollander said, "do not walk in here with this kind of money." Then she tore it. Once. Twice. And let the pieces go. Then she picked up the phone and dialed 911. And in the pocket of an 11-year-old girl's denim jacket 4 feet away, a $34 voice recorder that had been running for 2 hours and 11 minutes, because Nia Kearney was doing a family history project and had been carrying it everywhere for 2 weeks, got every single word of it. 9 minutes later, the front door opened, and a man walked in holding a white envelope he had driven from Atlanta to deliver by hand. And he stopped, and he looked at the paper on the floor, and he said, "Mr. Kearney, sir." The envelope in his hand contained Paige Hollander's promotion. Amos Kearney was 47, and he had been driving trucks since he was 21, and he still drove one about once a month because he liked it, and because it kept his people honest about the routes. He was not a small man. 6'1", heavy through the chest, gray coming in at the temples and in the beard. That Thursday he was wearing what he wore every day. That wasn't a funeral, a navy work jacket with Kearney cold lines stitched over the pocket jeans and boots. He had a phone with a shattered corner and a wallet worn into a curve. He owned 411 refrigerated trailers and 264 tractors, and Kearney Cold Line moved produce, dairy, and pharmaceutical freight across 7 southeastern states. He'd started with 1 truck in 2004, bought at auction with a loan from a credit union in Albany, Georgia after 11 banks said no. He remembers the number because he wrote it on the visor. 11. Here is the part of Amos Kearney's life that matters to the story, and it happened in that building. Odessa Kearney raised 3 kids in a house on Pell Road that she and her husband bought in 1979 and paid off in 2001. Her husband died in 2003. In 2007, she was 61, working part-time at the school cafeteria, and the roof needed doing. A man from Piedmont Guarantee Savings, the bank that occupied the building on Merchant Street before Ashbury Federal acquired it in 2011, sat her down and explained a refinance to her. It was a 2/28 adjustable. The teaser rate was 6.9% for 24 months, then it repriced. There was a prepayment penalty that made refinancing out of it cost more than she'd get. There was a yield spread premium paid to the broker for putting her in a worse loan than she qualified for, which is a sentence that means somebody got a bonus for it. Odessa Kearney had a credit score of 741. She qualified for a conventional fixed at 6.2. Nobody told her that because nobody was paid to. Amos was 29 and had 1 truck and was gone 11 days at a stretch. He read the papers after. He has said that he read them at a truck stop in Valdosta at 2 in the morning and sat there for a long time and then drove the rest of his run. The rate repriced in 2009. It went to 11.4, then 12.9. She lost the house on Pell Road in March of 2011, 4 months before Ashbury Federal bought Piedmont Guarantee and put its own sign on the building at Merchant Street. She lived in a rental on Cotton Mill Road for 2 years and died there in 2013 of a stroke at 67. And Amos Kearney will tell you flatly without embroidery, because he does not embroider, that he does not believe those 2 things are unrelated, and that he cannot prove it, and that he has stopped trying to. He banked at Ashbury Federal anyway. 16 years. People ask him about that, and he gets impatient with the question because the question assumes he had options. The next branch is 14 miles. He runs payroll for 309 people. His fuel cards, his factoring line, his equipment. Notes all of it is easier in one place, and the one place is on Merchant Street, and there is exactly one on Merchant Street. That's what a banking desert is. It isn't a metaphor. It's a distance. And he'd made a decision about it around 2014 sitting in the parking lot, which he described exactly once to his daughter years later. I decided I wasn't going to walk into a building every week and hate it. That's a full-time job and it doesn't pay, so I decided to just do my business and go. He kept that. 16 years he kept that. until a Thursday in March. The $5 million was the second closing payment on a minority stake, 35% of Kearney Cold Line sold to a logistics fund out of Charlotte in January. $1 million into a trust for Nia. $4 million into something he'd been working on with a lawyer since 2021, and had told maybe 6 people about a fund that buys out predatory refinances for elderly homeowners in 11 rural Georgia counties and replaces them with fixed-rate paper at par, not charity. He was firm about that with the lawyer, a revolving fund. It comes back and goes out again. He'd named it the Odessa Fund, and he'd hated naming it that and had done it anyway because his sister told him to. Nia Kearney was 11, and she talked more than anyone Amos had ever met, including his mother, which is saying something. Her mother lived in Atlanta and was 2 years into recovery and had Nia 1 weekend a month, and that arrangement was at that moment in time working, which Amos did not take for granted for a single day. Nia had a school project. 6th grade social studies, a unit called Family History, and the assignment was to interview a family member and produce an oral history. Nia had gotten a $34 digital recorder for Christmas and had taken the assignment approximately 11 times more seriously than intended. She had been carrying that recorder for 2 weeks. She recorded her father in the truck. She recorded her aunt on the phone. She recorded a neighbor who'd known her grandmother. She had 41 hours of tape and a due date on Friday and no idea what she was going to turn in. She had one rule which her father had given her: you tell people it's on, every time. She had told Amos it was on when they got in the truck at 1:40 that afternoon. She did not tell anyone at Ashbury Federal Savings because it did not occur to her that they were part of it. The other thing about Nia is that she asked her father questions nobody else did, and he answered them, which is a policy he had adopted deliberately, and which is the reason this story has a tape in it at all. 2 weeks before the bank and the truck between Perry and Cordell, she'd asked him why he still drove. "Because if I don't in about 4 years, I'll be a man who tells 300 people how to do a job I can't do anymore," Amos said. "And they'll know it before I do." Is that bad? It's the most common way a thing goes bad. She'd written that down. She wrote a lot of what he said down, which he found funny, and also privately unnerving, because a person does not fully appreciate how much they say until somebody starts keeping it. She asked him once whether they were rich. He thought about it for a while. "The company's worth a good bit," he said. "That's different than rich. Rich is when the money's just sitting there being yours. Ours is out working. It's in trailers and fuel and 309 people's paychecks. If everybody quit tomorrow, I'd have a lot of cold boxes in a field." "So we're not rich." "We're fine," Amos said. That's a better word, and it's harder to get. He had never once in 11 years told her what any number was. Not the revenue, not the sale price, not what was in her trust. He'd made that decision when she was small, and he'd made it for a specific reason, and he explained it to her exactly once. A number in your head about yourself changes how you walk into a room. I don't want you walking into rooms any particular way yet. You've got time. Which is why on the Thursday, when a woman at a counter said, "Men like you don't walk in here with this kind of money." Nia Kearney had no idea whether her father had $5 million or 500. She only knew that the man behind them had put a bag on the counter and been asked about his knee. Paige Hollander had run the Merchant Street branch for 2 years and 8 months, and on the Thursday this happened, she was 4 days from finding out whether she'd gotten the job she'd wanted for a decade. She was 41. Regional Operations Manager, 11 branches a title and a car allowance, and the end of a very long stretch of being told next cycle. The decision was Friday. Malcolm Teague was making it. And her branch had a problem. In the November 2024 exam, Ashbury Federal's Merchant Street branch had received a finding inadequate identification and escalation of potentially suspicious activity. 2 transactions in an 18-month window that should have been flagged and weren't. Nothing criminal. Nothing anyone lost money on. A finding. She had received it as a death sentence because in her read of her own career, it was one. So for 6 weeks, Paige Hollander had been flagging. Everything. Anything. A cash deposit that didn't match a pattern. A wire to a state she didn't expect. A customer who paused before answering a source of funds question. She had generated 31 internal flags in 6 weeks against a branch baseline of about 4. She would have told you, and did tell you at length in a hearing room 7 months later, that she was being rigorous, that she was cleaning up an exam finding, that every single flag was defensible on its face. And that's true. Each one was defensible on its face. Here is what she never once did because nobody ever does. She never looked at all 31 of them next to each other. 26 of the 31 were on Black or Latino customers in a branch whose customer base is about 41% Black and Latino. She did not intend a pattern. She produced one. Every day for 6 weeks, one defensible decision at a time. And then she put it in the bank's own system where it sat sorted and time-stamped and waiting like a loaded thing. The word for what she was is not racist exactly, and the story is worse if you settle for that word because you'll walk away thinking this requires a bad person. It doesn't. It requires an ordinary person, a metric, and a deadline. She was frightened and she was ambitious, and she had been handed an instruction that amounted to find more risk. And when a human being is told to find more risk and given no definition of it, the human being will find it exactly where their gut has always told them it lives. Her gut had been trained by the same country everyone else's was. That's the whole mechanism. It doesn't need a villain. It just needs a Thursday. 3 other people in the branch. Corey Lamb, 24 teller, 9 months in, who wanted very much to not be involved in anything. Roland Pike, 60 contract security, who had worked that lobby since it was Piedmont Guarantee, and who therefore was standing in the same room in 2007 when a man in a short-sleeved dress shirt explained a refinance to a woman named Odessa, and who remembered her because she used to bring the staff pralines at Christmas. And Ozella Means, 68 retired letter carrier, 31 years on a rural route in line to move money into a CD. Ozella Means had known Odessa Kearney for 50 years. She had carried the mail to the house on Pell Road. She had carried the notices to the house on Pell Road in 2010, and she had known what the envelopes were and had put them in the box because that was the job. She had never gotten over it. The branch closed at 4. Amos and Nia came through the door at 2:04. "It's on," Nia said at the rope. "I know it's on. I'm just saying it. That's the rule. You've said it 4 times since Perry. The rule doesn't have a limit, Daddy." Amos put his hand on the top of her head briefly, the way he had since she was 3. There were 2 people ahead of them. It took 6 minutes. At 2:11, Corey Lamb waved them up. Amos put the check on the counter face up. Beside it, he laid a folder already open because he had been over-preparing for bank counters since 2004, and it had never once been optional. "Depositing into the operating account business," he said. "Kearney Cold Line. That's the purchase agreement. That's the wire advice from this morning at 7:52. That's a letter from my CPA with her bar-adjacent license number and her cell phone, and she is expecting a call. That's my license. Account's been open here since 2009. Corey Lamb." 24 looked at the number on the check, and his ears went red, and he said, "Yes, sir, 1 moment." And he went and got the manager, which is correct. That is the procedure. Corey Lamb did his job at 2:11 in the afternoon and would replay the next 22 minutes for years. Paige Hollander came out. She looked at the check, then at Amos Kearney, the work jacket, the beard, the hands, the 11-year-old. Then, and this is the 4 seconds that the camera catches and that counsel would freeze and hold on a screen for a jury. She looked out the window at the parking lot. At a Ram 2500 with a Kearney Cold Line decal and a hitch in mud on the rocker panels. Then she said, "Sir, where did this money come from? Not let me pull your account. Not let me call the issuing bank." Nia Kearney, standing at her father's left hip, took her hand out of her jacket pocket and left the pocket open. Amos answered everything, twice. "Sale of a 35% equity stake in my company to Sumter Ridge Logistics Partners, Charlotte. This is the second closing payment. First one was in January, and it cleared through this branch." "I don't show that." "Then you're not looking at the right account. There's 2 operating and the equipment escrow." "Sir, I need you to lower your voice." Amos Kearney had not raised his voice. "This is documented, by the way, in a way it usually isn't because there is audio." The state's expert measured it across 22 minutes. His volume never exceeded normal conversational level. Hers rose 4 times. "Ma'am," he said, "my CPA's cell number is on that letter. First Charlotte Trust's verification line is on the wire advice, and they close at 5 and it's 10 past 2. One call ends this. I'm not going to be told how to run a verification. I'm not telling you how. I'm asking you to do one." Behind them, third in line, Ozella Means moved her purse to her other arm. At 2:19, Paige Hollander asked him what he did for a living. He told her. At 2:21, she asked how many trucks. He told her. At 2:23, she asked him, and this is verbatim off Naya's recording, and it was played out loud in a hearing room in Atlanta, and there is a transcript. And you started that with what exactly? Amos said, 1 truck and a loan from a credit union. From a credit union? Yes, ma'am. Not a bank. No, ma'am. 11 banks said no. He said it without any weight on it at all. I wrote the number on the visor. There's a pause on the tape. 2.5 seconds. Then Paige Hollander says, well, that's a story. You can hear on the recording Naya Kearney shift her feet. An 11-year-old with a $34 recorder understood the tone of that sentence instantly and completely, and there were 4 adults standing within 10 feet who also understood it and said nothing. At 2:24, a man came in behind them. White 50s golf polo khakis, a Sunbelt Rentals cap. He had a business deposit bag under his arm. He went to the second window and Corey Lamb was still standing at the first window doing nothing, because Corey Lamb had been frozen since 2/11. So the second teller, a woman named Deb, who had been at that branch 19 years and who is not otherwise in this story, took him. His deposit was $61,400 in checks and cash from a rental yard. It took 4 minutes. Nobody asked him where it came from. Nobody asked him what he did. Deb asked about his knee. Amos Kearney did not turn around to watch it. He didn't have to. It was 11 feet away and audible. Naya turned around and watched it. She was 11. Nobody had ever sat her down and explained a single thing about any of this because her father had made a decision about that too, and the decision had been, let her be a kid as long as I can hold the line. She watched a man walk in 20 minutes after them and walk out 4 minutes later. On the recording, she says one thing during that stretch very quietly, not to anybody. Huh. That's all. 1 syllable from an 11-year-old which the state's attorney would play for a hearing room in Atlanta, and then not say anything for about 5 seconds afterward, which is a thing lawyers do on purpose, and which worked. At 2:26, Ozella Means stepped out of line and walked up to the counter. She did not raise her voice either. She was 68 and 4'11", and she had carried mail for 31 years in weather. Ma'am, she said, I've banked in this building since it was Piedmont. I knew that man's mother. I'd like you to call the phone number on that paper. Paige Hollander said, ma'am, you'll need to return to the line. I will. Ozella Means did not move. Call the number. Ma'am. And Ozella Means, retired letter carrier, 31 years, who had put foreclosure notices in a box on Pell Road, because that was the job, and had never once gotten over it, took a flip phone out of her purse. She did not film. She was 68. She wouldn't have known how to angle it. She dialed the 1-800 number printed on the deposit slip in her hand, Ashbury Federal's own customer service line. And when a representative picked up, she said, My name is Ozella Means. I'm a customer. I'm standing in your Merchant Street branch in Marchand, Georgia, and I want to report what's happening in front of me right now, and I understand this call is recorded, and I want it recorded. Then she narrated it. Live. For 11 minutes. That call exists. It's in the bank's own system, time-stamped on a recorded line, and it is the single most damaging document in the entire case, and it was created by a 68-year-old woman with a flip phone who did not know she was doing anything clever. There were 14 people in the lobby by 2:28. 6 had phones up. None of them said anything. It's worth sitting with that for a second because it happens in every one of these, and it is the part that gets skipped. There was a man by the deposit slips in a golf shirt who watched the whole thing and later gave a statement in which he said he'd assumed the manager knew something he didn't. There was a woman with a stroller who left. There was a young man, maybe 19, who took a step forward and stopped. Every one of the 6 people filming believed they were doing something. That's the honest psychology of it. Filming has the posture of intervention. You're facing it, you're documenting, you're building a record, and it produces a real result, and it costs absolutely nothing. Anything that feels like courage and costs nothing is something else wearing courage's coat. The 2 people in that room who actually did something were a 68-year-old woman with a flip phone and an 11-year-old who had left a recorder running. Neither of them raised a phone. At 2:31, Amos Kearney tried once more, and he tried it the only way he had. He put his hands flat on the counter, palms down. Ma'am, I want to say one thing and then I'll be quiet. You've asked me 11 questions and you've answered 0 of them yourself. You've got 2 phone numbers and a wire confirmation in front of you and you haven't touched the phone. So whatever's happening here, it's not verification because verification takes 2 minutes and I brought you the number. He paused. I've banked in this building 16 years. My mother sat in that chair right there. And he did not point. He just moved his chin about an inch. In 2007, and a man who worked here talked her into a loan that took her house. I have never once brought that up in here. Not to you, not to anybody, not in 16 years because I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to carry it through that door every week. The lobby was completely silent. On the tape, you can hear the HVAC. I'm bringing it up now, Amos said, because I would like you to understand what it costs me to stand here and be polite to you, and I would like you to use that information to make a better decision than the one you're about to make. 11 seconds of silence on the recording. 11 seconds is a very long time. And then Paige Hollander, 41 years old, 4 days from a job she'd wanted for a decade, 6 weeks into flagging everything that moved, said, "Men like you do not walk in here with this kind of money." She tore it, once down the middle, then again. Then she opened her hand over the counter and the pieces went down and one of them went off the edge and slid across the tile toward Naya's shoe. Naya bent to pick it up. "Baby." Amos caught her upper arm, gently. "Leave it." "But..." "Leave it. It's paper. It's not the money, it's just the paper, and they'll cut me another one on Monday." He crouched down so he was under her eye line, which is where he always went with her. "You okay?" Naya's whole face was doing something complicated. "Is it still on?" Amos asked her. He said it quietly. "It's the quietest thing on the tape, and you can barely hear it, and it is the reason a state banking commission opened an investigation." And Naya Kearney, 11 years old, said, "It's on, Daddy. It's been on the whole time." Amos Kearney stood up. He looked at Paige Hollander for about 3 seconds. Then he said, "Okay," and started to gather his folder. And Paige Hollander, who had heard "It's on, Daddy," and understood in that instant precisely and completely what had just happened, picked up the phone and dialed 911. The 911 call is 1 minute and 54 seconds. She reported an attempted fraud, a subject refusing to leave, and a subject becoming agitated. She was asked for a description, and she gave one, and the first 3 words of the description were about his race and his size, and the word she used for his behavior was aggressive, and at the moment she said it, he was standing at a counter putting papers back into a folder. Roland Pike, 60 years old, contract security, heard her say it from 11 feet away. He'd been standing in that lobby since it was Piedmont Guarantee. He'd been standing in it in 2007. He remembered pralines at Christmas. Paige Hollander hung up and said, "Roland, escort him out." And Roland Pike said out loud in front of 14 people in 2 recordings, "No, ma'am." The lobby went absolutely still. "Excuse me." I said, "No, ma'am." He didn't move from where he was standing. "That man ain't done anything, and I'm not putting my hands on him, and if that's a fireable thing, then you go on and fire me." Paige Hollander said, "You work for a contractor. You don't work for me." "No, ma'am, I don't," Roland Pike agreed, which is how I can say no. He was fired 8 days later by the contractor. He was rehired 11 days after that by Ashbury Federal directly at a materially higher wage on the personal instruction of a man who had by then listened to a recording of that exchange 4 times. Here is the low point, and it is not the tear, and it is not the 911 call. Amos Kearney turned around, put his hand between his daughter's shoulder blades and walked her toward the door. He walked slowly, deliberately, both hands visible folder tucked under one arm so his fingers showed. He kept himself between Nia and the counter. At the door he stopped and he said something to Nia that is on the tape, and it is the reason people cry at this part. "When we get outside, we're going to stand by the truck, not in it, beside it where anybody can see us. And you're going to hold on to my belt loop, and if a police car comes, you don't move and you don't run and you don't reach for anything, and neither do I." "Okay. Okay. You're not in trouble. I'm not in trouble." "Then why do we have to do that?" And on the recording there's a pause, and then Amos Kearney says, "Because I'd rather teach you something you don't need than not teach you something you do." They stood in that parking lot for 9 minutes. 2 deputies came. It took under 4 minutes to resolve because one of them had run freight through Kearney Coldline's yard for 2 seasons in his 20s and said, "Mr. Kearney," before anybody said anything else, which is a thing that happens in a town of 6,000. It was still 9 minutes. An 11-year-old stood in a bank parking lot in March holding her father's belt loop for 9 minutes with a recorder running in her pocket on a Thursday with a school project due Friday. Sir, Malcolm Teague had driven 2.5 hours from Atlanta with a white envelope on the passenger seat. He was 58 regional president for Ashbury Federal, and he had made a decision about 11 years earlier that promotions of this size got delivered in person because he'd received his own by email and had never forgiven it. The envelope had Paige Hollander's name on it. She'd gotten it. Regional Operations Manager, 11 branches effective the 1st of next month. He came through the door at 2:47. He walked into pieces of a check on the floor, a security guard standing with his arms folded and his jaw set, a teller with his hands flat on the counter staring at nothing, a 68-year-old woman on a flip phone saying, "And now a gentleman in a suit just came in," and through the glass a man and a girl standing beside a Ram 2500 in the parking lot not touching it with 2 deputies. Malcolm Teague crossed that lobby, opened the door, and went outside. He stopped about 8 feet away. He did not extend his hand because a man was standing in a parking lot with deputies, and his daughter and Malcolm Teague had enough sense to understand what an extended hand would be asking for. "Mr. Kearney," he said it clearly. "Sir, my name is Malcolm Teague. I'm the regional president. I don't know what's happened yet. Are you and your daughter all right?" Amos Kearney looked at him for a moment. "No," he said. "Okay." Malcolm Teague nodded once slowly. "Do you want to tell me, or do you want to go home and tell me tomorrow, or do you want to never speak to me again?" "All 3 of those are on the table, and I'll take any of them." That's the sentence that people quote. Not the "sir." Amos said, "My daughter has it on tape." Malcolm Teague looked at Nia Kearney, 11 years old, in a denim jacket. "All of it." "All of it," Nia said. 2 hours and 41 minutes. Malcolm Teague stood in a parking lot in Marchand, Georgia, holding a white envelope with a promotion in it, and closed his eyes for about a second and a half. Then he said, "Ma'am, may I ask you to please not delete that?" "I wasn't going to," said Nia Kearney. The video that went up that night was 49 seconds of shaky phone footage, and it got 26 million views, and it is not what ended Paige Hollander. 3 things ended her, and she made all of them. 1. The audio, not the tear the 22 minutes before it. Video shows an act, audio shows a process. Anyone can claim a bad moment. Nobody survives a recording of themselves refusing 11 separate times to pick up a phone. 2. The 911 call and the specific gap between the word aggressive and a recording proving what he was actually doing while she said it. That gap is not a matter of opinion. It's 2 audio files with the same timestamps. 3. And this is the one that made it a federal matter instead of a firing the flags. When Ashbury Federal's outside counsel pulled Merchant Street's activity for the exam response, they pulled 6 weeks. 31 flags. 26 on Black and Latino customers. She had built it herself. Every day for 6 weeks, one defensible decision at a time into the bank's own system, sorted and time-stamped. She had not thought of it as a record. She had thought of it as work. It became the exhibit. The Georgia Department of Banking and Finance held it in Atlanta in October, 7 months later, in a room with fluorescent lights and 11 people in it. Paige Hollander attended with counsel. Amos Kearney attended because he was asked to. Nia did not attend because he refused and because the state agreed the tape was the tape, and an 11-year-old did not need to authenticate her own voice in a room full of adults. They played 22 minutes of it. That's the whole hearing, really. The state's presentation was: here is the audio, here is the 911 recording, here is the customer service line recording, and here are 31 flags in a spreadsheet. Paige Hollander's counsel made the only argument available, and it was not a stupid one. He argued that every individual decision his client made that day was within the discretion granted to a branch manager operating under an active exam finding, and that the state was constructing intent out of hindsight and a spreadsheet. Then the state played 223. And you started that with what exactly? 1 truck and a loan from a credit union. From a credit union. Yes, ma'am. Not a bank. No, ma'am. 11 banks said no. I wrote the number on the visor. 2.5 seconds. Well, that's a story. The hearing officer asked counsel to explain what verification purpose that exchange served. Counsel said he'd take it under advisement. Amos Kearney was asked one question at the end by a commissioner whether he believed the treatment he received was related to his race. And he said, and this is in the transcript, and it is the only thing he ever said publicly about the whole affair: "I've been doing business in this state for 26 years, and I don't know how to prove what's in a person's head, and I've stopped trying. What I know is a man came in behind me with $61,000 in a bag, and nobody asked him one question, and I had a wire confirmation and a CPA's cell phone number, and I got asked 11. I'll let y'all do the arithmetic. I've got a company to run. Paige Hollander was terminated the following Tuesday. She never received the envelope. Malcolm Teague put it in his inside pocket in the parking lot, and it stayed there for 3 days, and then he shredded it himself. She surrendered no license because branch managers don't hold one. She was named individually in a civil action that settled. She has not worked in banking since. She gave one interview to a podcast 18 months later, and the interviewer asked her whether she thought race had anything to do with it, and there is a pause on that recording that is 9 seconds long, and then she says, "I've thought about that more than you'd think," and then she says, "I don't know," and it is weirdly the most honest moment in the entire aftermath. Corey Lamb was not disciplined. He resigned in June. In his exit interview, he wrote one sentence: "I said yes ma'am 9 times, and I knew after the third one." Roland Pike got hired directly and got a raise and gave exactly one comment to a reporter, which was, "I'm 60. What were they going to do, ruin my career?" Ozella Means declined every interview request. When Ashbury's lawyers called to thank her, she said, "I didn't do it for the bank," and hung up. The 26 customers were contacted by name in writing. 9 of them had never known they'd been flagged. 4 of them had had transactions delayed and had assumed it was them. The lawyers came on Monday with a number. Amos Kearney let them get all the way to the end. Then he said, "I don't want it. And if you put a confidentiality clause in front of my daughter, I'll walk out of here and you'll read about it instead." He gave them 2 conditions. 1. Every flag, every branch published quarterly by demographic aggregate, no names on the website forever. "You didn't set out to build a pattern," he told them. "That's the point. Nobody does. So make it so a person can see the pattern they're building before it's 6 weeks long." The bank fought that one for 4 months. It's the cheapest thing they agreed to, and it was the hardest because a policy is a press release and a published number is a permanent risk. 2. The 26 get letters signed by a human being and their flags cleared. That's it. 2. He did not ask for money, and he did not ask for anyone to be fired. And when Malcolm Teague asked him directly whether he wanted the branch closed, Amos said, "It's the only bank in 14 miles. Closing it punishes everybody but her." The check was reissued the following Monday. Amos deposited it at Merchant Street at the same counter with Corey Lamb, who has said it took him 3 tries to get his hands steady. $1 million into Naya's trust, $4 million into the Odessa Fund, which as of this writing has bought out and refinanced 194 predatory mortgages held by homeowners over 60 in 11 Georgia counties, and has lost money on 11 of them and has revolved the rest. Its office is on Merchant Street, 2 doors down. Naya Kearney's family history project was due Friday. She had 41 hours of tape and a Thursday that had turned into something she did not have a category for, and she sat at the kitchen table that night with headphones on and did not say anything for 2 hours. Amos let her alone. That was hard. He checked on her twice and did not ask. Around 9, she came and stood in the doorway of the office. "Can I ask you something and you tell me the true answer?" "Yeah." "If I turn in the bank part, is that going to make everything worse for you?" Amos Kearney set down what he was holding. He has said since that he thought about lying, not a big lie, just the soft kind. Don't you worry about that. And that he is glad in a way he cannot really express that he didn't. "Probably," he said. "Some. It's already out there, so it's not about keeping it quiet. But every time it comes back around, people are going to look at me a certain way for a while. And they're going to look at you a certain way, and I mind that one a lot more." Naya stood in the doorway. "But you're 11 and it's your tape," he said. "So it's your call and I'll back whatever it is and I won't be disappointed either direction. That's not a thing I'm saying to be nice, that's just true." She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "Okay," and went back to the table. What she turned in Friday was 11 minutes long. It contained none of the bank, not 1 second. Not the tear, not the 911 call, not men like you, not Roland Pike saying no ma'am. What it contained was a recording she'd made 3 weeks earlier in the cab of a truck between Perry and Cordell of her father describing a house on Pell Road, the porch. The pecan tree, the way his mother kept the good scissors in a drawer nobody was allowed in. And then because Naya asked, and because he answered his daughter's questions, what happened to it. He talks for 9 minutes. He never raises his voice. At one point he says the interest rate out loud, both of them the 6.9 and the 12.9, and there's a silence after, and you can hear the truck. And at the end, Nia asks, and this is an 11-year-old unprompted on tape, "Are you mad at them?" And Amos Kearney says, "I was for a long time. Now I'm mostly just trying to get in front of it. Being mad don't buy anybody's house back." She got a 98. Her teacher, a woman named Shauna Whitlow, wrote on it, "Nia, this is a real piece of work. Thank you for trusting the class with it." Mrs. Whitlow did not know. Nobody at that school knew for another 2 weeks. Nia Kearney had a recording that 26 million people eventually heard, and she chose at 11 to hand in the one about a house instead. When a reporter finally asked her why about a year later, and it's the only question she ever answered, she said, "Because the bank part is about her, and the assignment was about my family." Here is the part Amos Kearney did not know about for 2 years. The recorder had been running the whole time. He knew that. Everybody knows that. It's the whole story. What he didn't know is that it was still running afterward. Nia forgot to stop it. She was 11 and she'd stood in a parking lot for 9 minutes and she got in the truck and forgot, and it ran for another 26 minutes and then the battery went. She found it when she was 13 going through old files to free up space. There's 4 minutes of road noise. There's Nia saying she's hungry. There's Amos saying they'll stop. And then about 9 minutes in, there's a sound of a truck slowing and stopping. He'd pulled over on 300 north of Marchand, and about 40 seconds of nothing at all. And then a man saying very quietly, not to anybody, "I'm sorry, Mama." That's it. That's the whole thing. 3 words and a name. Then the truck starts moving again, and he says in a completely normal voice, "You want Zaxby's or you want the other one?" And Nia says the other one, and that's the tape. She didn't tell him she'd found it. Not at 13. She told him at 17 in a car on the way back from looking at a school in Athens, in the flat, unremarkable way that 17-year-olds detonate things. "I know what you said in the truck, after the bank." Amos Kearney drove for about a mile. "Which part?" "The part where you pulled over." He drove for another mile. "What'd I say?" "You said I'm sorry, Mama." And Amos Kearney, 53 years old, on 441 south of Watkinsville with his daughter in the passenger seat, said, "Yeah." "Why were you sorry?" He took a while. "Because I was 29 and I had one truck and I was gone 11 days at a time and I read those papers after instead of before," he said. "And because I stood in that building for 16 years being polite, and I told myself that was strength, and I'm still not 100% sure it wasn't just easier." Nia said, "That's not your fault." "I know it's not." He changed lanes. "Knowing don't do as much as people say it does." They drove a while. Then Nia Kearney said, "You bought 194 houses back. 194 mortgages. Not the same. It's close enough that you can stop apologizing to her." Amos Kearney did not say anything to that. But he has told exactly one person about that conversation. His sister, and the way he told it was, "She took something off me on 441 that I'd been carrying since 2011, and she did it in about 9 words, and she didn't even slow down." There's a photograph in the office of the Odessa Fund on Merchant Street, 2 doors down from an Ashbury Federal branch that is still open because a man declined to close it. It's not a good photograph. It's a phone picture badly lit, taken by a 68-year-old retired letter carrier who did not know how to angle a phone. It's a Ram 2500 in a parking lot in March. There's a man standing beside it, not touching it, hands visible. There's an 11-year-old girl beside him with her fist closed around his belt loop. You cannot see the recorder. It's in her pocket. It's running. That's the whole story, and it's the only picture of it anybody took, and the woman who took it was the only adult in that building who did anything. Underneath it, in a frame, somebody has put a strip of paper with 9 words on it, and Amos Kearney says he didn't do it, and Nia says she didn't either, and both of them are probably lying. It's on Daddy. It's been on the whole time.